Joke character is a term I see silly people argue over sometimes. Just like any archetype, there's no dictionary definition, so everyone has different ideas of what a joke character is supposed to be. With some characters it's obvious, like NekoArc. However, I've seen people call the likes of Jigglypuff, Khan, or Pet Shop joke characters. That last one is especially ridiculous to me. However, there is one character who defines this archetype and has pretty much become the standard for it. If you're even a casual enjoyer of fighting games, you know who I'm talking about. Dan Hibiki. He's been around for a while and his origins are as humorous as they are spiteful. Let's take it back to '92. After Street Fighter II released and redefined the fighting game genre, multiple companies began developing and releasing fighting games of their own to try and take a shot at capturing that SF2 magic. One of those companies was SNK, who would go on to become one of Capcom's main rivals and later collaborator. In 1992, SNK put out Art of Fighting, which contained two characters that were noted for being extremely similar to Ryu and Ken, Ryo Sakazaki and Robert Garcia. Ryo in particular stood out. He's a barefoot karate man wearing a gi, and his specials consist of a fireball, an uppercut, and a forward advancing kick. Capcom weren't going to take this one sitting down, and they initially fired back with this piece of art that included a nameless man with a ponytail and an orange gi being defeated by Sagat, but in 1995, they took the joke to a much more ridiculous extreme. Street Fighter Alpha, a game meant to be a prequel to the Street Fighter II series, included Dan Hibiki as a secret playable character. Dan is a joke character, meant to be a giant potshot at SNK, and this is evident in every facet of his design. Visually, he resembles both Ryo and Robert. He has a similar ponytail to Robert and a karate gi with a black undershirt just like Ryo. He also has victory quotes in Alpha 3 that directly reference Art of Fighting and the King of Fighters. More importantly though, his design takes the basic Shoto outline that Ryu and Ken created and that Ryo was accused of copying, and essentially dunks it right into the trash. Dan is basically meant to be a crappy version of a Shoto, with inferior imitations of all their trademark specials. First, his fireball. Ryu and Ken's Hadouken is a projectile that travels full screen at varying speeds. In sharp contrast to this amazing space control and zoning tool, we have Dan's quote-unquote fireball, the Godouken. Wow, okay, you didn't even try. So yeah, the Godouken is pathetic. Calling it a projectile is a stretch, because it barely travels anywhere, making it quite worthless in situations where the Hadouken shines. This is, funnily enough, another jab at SNK. In Art of Fighting, there's a spirit meter that enhances certain special moves. Ryo's fireball, depending on how much meter you have, will either be a proper projectile or a pathetic little burst that barely goes anywhere after leaving his hand. Dan's Godouken is basically the same, but since there's no spirit meter, his fireball is always puny. His DP is called the Koryuken, and in Alpha 1 I believe it's just a standard DP. Alpha 2 though retooled it in an interesting way. See, normally DPs in these old games are fully invul to suit their purpose as anti-airs and reversals. Dan's DP does that too. Sometimes. Here's the gist. Dan's DP does have invincibility, but it will only ever trigger 1/8 of the time. Yeah, the startup invul on Dan's uppercut is fucking RNG based, meaning what should be his most consistent defensive option is not so consistent. Finally, the Danku Kyaku, Dan's take on the Tatsu. Colloquially known as Dan Kicks, it's probably the most functional of his special moves. It's nothing amazing, and it's far less reliable of an anti-projectile tool compared to Ryu, Ken, and Akuma's Tatsus, but it's a decent combo ender and annoying pressure tool. Other than his bargain bin specials, his normals resemble the Shoto's normals too, so it shouldn't take much thinking to figure out Dan's viability in the grand scheme of things. He's pretty bad, and it's mostly because of the poor quality of his specials. Despite having some decent pokes, his lack of a fireball makes him really bad at playing any kind of ranged game, but his normals aren't suited to any kind of highly aggressive play. His supers are equally terrible, so he doesn't have much use for meter either. They often require using the level 2 or level 3 versions for them to do decent damage and have any range, so the utility is limited. Ultimately, a pretty terrible first showing, but also a perfect debut for the character. He's so bad that he ends up being insanely memorable. Hell, even the fact that he's a secret character is humorous in of itself, especially considering the other hidden characters in Alpha 1 are M. Bison and Akuma, who were boss characters from the Street Fighter II games. Moving on to Alpha 2, besides the changes to his DP, he received new versions of his taunt. Taunting is an integral part of Dan's identity. Unlike other characters in Alpha 1, Dan can taunt an infinite amount of times, and Alpha 2 gives him forward and rolling taunts, and a taunt super that lets him blow meter for a BM super that does nothing except get into the opponent's head. Other than that, Dan is, for the most part, the same, but he's actually not as bad as you might think. It's true that he maintains his intentional weaknesses, but Alpha 2 adds a new universal mechanic, the custom combo. Going into a custom combo makes all your moves cancelable and gives them infinite juggle potential. Dan's custom combo damage is genuinely really scary, and the added threat of the Valle CC, which makes low attacks unblockable during custom combo activation if the opponent is standing, makes his far-reaching sweep quite the threat. He's still bad in Alpha 2, of course, but custom combos are the great equalizer and let him keep even the likes of Rose and Chun honest. Still, there isn't much reason to pick him over Ken or Akuma or even Ryu unless you just want to fuck around. And really, nothing wrong with that. Alpha 3 Dan remains mostly the same. Alpha 3 added the ISM system, which changes up things slightly by giving you 3 different modes, each of which changes how your meter works and occasionally gives characters new specials. Doesn't change that Dan is still kinda cheeks. It would be a while before Dan's return as he missed out on the entire Street Fighter 3 series. I guess he passed on the mantle of Shoto but worse to Sean, only in Third Strike evidently, but he did find himself in a few Capcom crossovers. First up, the Marvel vs. Capcom series. Dan made his debut in Marvel Super Heroes vs. Street Fighter, the middle child of these games so to speak. While the other Shotos got some buffs to their moves to make them fit in more with the over-the-top powers of the Marvel gang, Dan didn't get jack shit. His fireball is still pathetic, his supers are bad, and the only new addition to his kit is a command throw super meant to imitate the infamous Raging Demon. It even has a similar input, just inverted. Like the Raging Demon, it'll grab the opponent and deal damage, but it also hurts Dan. Yeah, on hits, this thing completely drains his health, leaving him with a mere pixel. You would carry this move to MVC2 where he was also playable, and undeniably one of the worst characters in the game. In fact, the only reason he's not the worst is because of characters like Roll and Servbot, who you could probably argue are also joke characters. Hey, at least he still has the taunt super in both games. Ironically, when Capcom began collaborating with SNK, Dan was never left out despite being a joke at the expense of SNK. In Capcom vs SNK 1 and 2, he's playable with most of the same characteristics. Funny thing about CVS2 Dan is that even though he's bottom 2, there is one character you could argue is worse. Poor Kyosuke. When SNK took a crack at the crossover thing with SVC Chaos, they also added Dan, and funnily enough, they really played into the jokes that Dan was built off of. For one, Ryo is in this game, although he was in CVS2, but SVC also features Mr. Karate, who Dan's father Go Hibiki was meant to be a parody of. The game directly features dialogue referencing this, along with the resemblance Dan has to Robert Garcia and Ryo. It really adds to the charm of the SNK Capcom rivalry. Dan was also playable in Super Gem Fighter Mini Mix, which is a weird game crossing over some of Capcom's series and referencing even more of them through the character movesets. Dan is once again a secret character, but I feel like he stands out less when everyone in this game does goofy stuff. I guess him using his dead dad's zombified corpse as an attack does make up for that somewhat. Years later, Dan would make his glorious return in Street Fighter IV, where he was added to the console ports. And he hasn't changed much. Godoken is still barely a projectile, Dan kicks are still pretty whack, but his DP actually appears to work as an anti-air and reversal this time, no longer only being invul 1/8 of the time like in Alpha 2. Good for you, Dan! The main benefits he received were some of the universal mechanics for either introduced or brought over from games Dan wasn't in. EX moves, for example. EX Godoken. God damn it, we are so fucking close. It just barely fizzles out before reaching the opponent, and it doesn't knock down on hit either. I guess it's better than his other EX specials, as EX Dan Kicks and EX DP don't really have any superior properties and by themselves do less damage than the H versions. I'd make a comment about this being a joke, but in this case it definitely was. Ultra combos were the major new addition, offering you a powerful super move that can only be used once your revenge gauge is filled by taking damage. Dan's Ultra does good damage, but he doesn't really have many ways to combo into it outside of a focus attack crumple, a fairly common problem in this version of Street Fighter 4 that didn't escape Dan unfortunately, so you can only ever land it by getting it raw as a reversal. Dan in vanilla SF4 remained quite horrible, but Capcom seemed more willing to try and make him into a legitimate character as SF4's lifespan continued. The first update to SF4 was Super, which added a second Ultra for every character. Dan's second Ultra is nice as he can actually combo into it out of a DP FADC. FADC, Focus Attack Dash Cancel, allows you to cancel specials at the cost of 2 bars. DPs being cancelable was insanely strong, as it would often make them safe or even plus on block, and with Dan's Ultra 2, it offered him a nice juggle route for solid damage, something his Ultra 1 lacked. A later patch removed some of its startup invul though, which seemingly suggested they wanted Ultra 1 to be his reversal Ultra and Ultra 2 to be for damage. Throughout the Super Street Fighter 4 era, he would receive frame data and damage buffs, slowly but surely improving him as a character. He wasn't particularly great, obviously, as his specials are still whack aside from light Dan kicks, which was actually a pretty insane pressure tool, and there are like 15 characters on the SF4 roster that do everything he does better, but by Ultra SF4 he was legitimately decent. He was never intended to be a super prominent character, and you could use him to troll, which some players did. If you ever watched the hilarious set between Justin Wong and Air at Marvel Madness in Super Street Fighter 4, you'd witness how fun it could be to fuck with people. Justin doing taunt super into Ultra is a major highlight. Hey, I guess that's another way to combo into Ultra 1. However, Ultra made him into a genuinely okay character, which is pretty sweet. Now before we move on, we have to discuss the final revision of Street Fighter 4, and no, I'm not referring to Ultra. I'm talking about Omega SF4. Omega is a weird thing. It was an update that made a sweeping amount of balance changes to every character in Ultra SF4. For some, it was just used as a chance to adjust them, but a lot of characters received totally new specials and playstyles in some cases. Ever wanted a game where Guile can perform Remy's cold blue kick? Omega Street Fighter 4. It's extremely jarring at first that Capcom would even do this, but if you really pay attention, you start to realize that many of the changes in Omega reflected new moveset additions that would be added in Street Fighter V and even 6, which essentially made this Capcom's testing grounds. Examples include Omega Ryu having a parry similar to his V-Skill 1 in SF5, or Omega Cammy having a feint option from her hooligan flip that's similar to the one she has in SF6. Anyway, Dan in Omega has the same universal dash improvements, and many of his normals have been buffed. So that's cool, but there are a lot more standout changes. First up, 2 new specials. 214P is Dan Retsuken, a genuinely solid combo ender. It gives him a reliable ender out of light and good damage out of his routes. He also has a fucking command throw now. It's a 360 motion, and it's nothing amazing as the Oki is poor and it forces a side switch, but realistically there's no disadvantage to having it. So, more silly stuff. His DP now has a just frame variant if he performed the down forward part of the input on the same frame as punch. Yeah, they gave Dan a fucking electric wind god fist, and it's actually a really solid combo tool. His EX Dan kicks was tweaked so that rather than halting his momentum in the air, it now moves downward like a dive kick, tremendously improving its use. You could even do it from a backwards jump. Dan now has a push block for some reason. It's completely resourceless and very hard to punish, so go ham with this. I don't even know. Finally, Dan received the ability to cancel his dash into normals, giving him some bodega run cancel pressure. It's actually pretty cool. Goodness me, someone on the Omega staff really favored Dan. He's not that much different in terms of being a worse Shoto, but his buffs give him better damage, pokes, and mix-ups. There's not really any competitive history to look at because Omega wasn't played much on release and quickly got overshadowed when 5 came out, but with how many old games Capcom has been re-releasing with rollback, perhaps we'll see more people explore Omega if Ultra SF4 ever gets a rollback update. The final step on this journey is Street Fighter V. Dan was added to the game as part of the final season of DLC. Now, Dan is in an interesting position for this game. His whole shtick for the past 20 years is being made bad on purpose, but Capcom were now selling him as downloadable content, and I can't imagine there are that many gamers out there who are keen to the idea of paying $20 for a season pass containing a character that's garbage. On the other hand, I do find the idea of a season pass having bottom 1 Dan and Luke in the same release schedule very funny. Anyway, for this go around, Dan got some new techniques and he's more of a contender than ever before. SF5 Dan has been tweaked in ways that make him strong, but also maintain his joke character status. Dan's normals have that same Shoto DNA in them, but much like with Omega SF4, they've been tuned to be just good normals. Nothing here sticks out as being great, but not bad either. Dan's specials are mostly the same. Gadoken is still pathetic in terms of travel range, but now it can be charged. Charged Gadokens are highly plus on hit, allowing for combos out of them, which makes them more useful than they've probably ever been before. His DP is mostly the same, and Dan Kicks is still a combo ender / pressure tool. Dan also still has Dan Retsuken from Omega SF4. He definitely seems unimpressive just looking at these parts of his kit, but where Dan really shines is his V system, which he takes advantage of in a lot of really creative ways that make him stand out. His V skill 1 is a taunt that he can perform from a forward or back roll and a jump. Yeah, they basically gave him a V-skill that's entirely dedicated to taunting, although it can be used as a combo tool since he can cancel his DP into it. His V-skill too is actually pretty terrifying, and I wonder if it was inspired by his dash cancel stuff from Omega SF4. It's another taunt with utility, as he can cancel it out of his normals, allowing for some solid stagger pressure and combos. Of course, both of these V-skills build his V-meter, although Dan's V-skills are unique, as they also build the opponent's V-meter. This is not good, obviously, but hey, it's funny. Dan's V-Trigger 1 is his Ultra 2 from SF4, and it's notable for being the only 1-bar V-Trigger in the entire game. The cost of a V-Trigger can affect its utility greatly, and in Dan's case, well, this is the most easily accessible trigger because it builds up so fast, especially if you're using his V-skills a lot. It creates a giant projectile that offers a good combo tool as it can be cancelled from his V-Skill 1 and his normals, and it's a decent pressure tool as it is plus on block, albeit with high pushback. It's nothing amazing, but hey, it's cheap. His V-Trigger 2 enhances his Fireball and DP, with just frame versions for both that make them much stronger, a standard Shoto V-Trigger but strong nonetheless. Now of course, it's impossible to discuss Dan in SF5 without mentioning his Infinite. The Danfinite was discovered shortly after his release. It was pretty easy, and while the scaling obviously meant it would take 10 years to kill, this also meant it was a good timer scam. However, what really grabbed people's attention was during the 2021 CPT season, when RB, playing Dan, used the Infinite to win a game against Oil King. A player winning a game with an Infinite in a fighting game in 2021 is some wild shit. Infinites in modern games are usually a big no-no. Even DNF Duel, which had crazy shit like TODs and full screen normals, didn't let them fly, so this was pretty insane to see. What stands out even more is how Capcom dealt with it. Rather than changing how the hit stun or frame data works or something, Capcom nerfed the Infinite by giving Dan a new move. Post-patch, the meterless version of Gadoken now has a random chance of shooting a red fireball that knocks down. This means that, theoretically, the Infinite still works, it's just that now the Infinite will likely drop because of the red fireball. That's a really cool nerf, and it fits Dan's character perfectly. Dan in 5 is maybe the most competent the character has ever been on release other than maybe Omega SF4, but also still extremely faithful to his original appearance. He even still has the legendary taunt. They did a phenomenal job capturing what makes him so memorable, while not trading that off by making him subpar. So that's Dan Hibiki. He certainly came a long way from his humble beginnings as a completely unviable joke character. I'm not one to really care about DLC, but I'd like to see the SF6 devs give Dan a shot. It would be extremely funny to see someone get their EXDP baited by Drive Rush backroll taunt, if they decide to bring that back. Anyway, that's all for now. Thanks for watching, have a great night, and take care. Hey everyone, thank you for watching this video. It's time for me to thank my channel members again. Thank you to Old Man Han, Cammy the Killer, Jazba, Mortis, Arg Seals, Wormy, Terry Hints, Perfect Orange, Pet Shop from Fortnite, Happy the Hap Hap, HPHK, Gundog92, Isaac the Collector, and Kira the Stowaway. Thank you all very much for the support, it means a lot. If you want to become a channel member, there's a link in the description, it's $2.99 USD. Thank you all for watching this video. I know it was a bit shorter, but it's just it's something I had planned since like the beginning of the month, so I figured I might as well just get it out now. Anyway, thank you for watching. Have a great night. I love you all. Take care.